I've started the recording.
You know, it was 90 years ago that I went through the first decade of the Depression. And I must admit, I don't remember the huge sandstorms that we used to get. But my dad showed me some hills along fence lines. He said there used to be fence posts ground level underneath those hills, but they were 30, 40 feet high. And what had happened was that what do you call the thistles, the round ones that tumbleweeds? Tumbleweeds were rampant in the area, and tumbleweeds would hit the fence line and clog up and serve as a barrier, so that when the sandstorms came, the sand just dumped itself right there, and you had a whole stream of a whole hillside that was nothing but sand, um, covering up what was formerly fence posts way underneath the ground. That made quite an impression on me as a little kid, uh, hearing my dad talk about those sandstorms and that sort of thing. But I don't remember them at all. I don't remember them at all. Um, the only thing I remember about early days of the farm was riding the pony. We had a horse named Pat that was a wonderful horse, um, and I could ride him. Um, and I did until until he died, I guess. Um, anyway, it was my job to ride Pat out to get the cows, and Pat would dutifully go toward the herd, and then he'd circle around them and start heading them home, and then follow them to make sure that they went carefully. He was a remarkable animal, and I just sat on his back and rode along.
He took you, not you taking him, huh?
What?
He took you instead of you taking him.
That's right. That's right. Uh, he was the one that I was riding when he came down over a hillside, and we hit a badger hole. And he was deathly afraid of badger holes, and for good reason, because if he got his leg into it, he would break his leg. But the sensible thing is that he knew that would happen, so he would be very careful of badger holes. Anyway, we came up over this hillside, and there was a badger hole, and he stopped dead. He planted his feet on both sides of the badger hole, stopped dead. And I didn't have a saddle at the time, and I rolled down over his head. uh, and my arm bent in the middle like this.
Yeah.
And I broke the arm.
Oh no.
So it was broken at the wrist right about halfway up the femur.
Mm-hmm.
And then, since we were out in the middle of the prairie, I didn't have a fence post to climb to get back on the horse. So I led him home. And I distinctly, to this day, remember my mother, who was out in the garden on the west side of the house. And she saw me coming and screamed because I was walking along with my arms down on each side, and my right arm was longer than the left. Because it had broken the bone and just separated it completely.
Yeah.
And so the arm was longer. Anyway, she screamed, and somehow, I don't know if I fainted or what, but anyway, I don't remember what happened next. I know my dad took me into the doctor, which was, he lived 20 miles away, but he did house visits at any time of the day or night. Anyway, he took me in, and we looked at the arm, and that was the time, and I think I told you about this. He introduced an X-ray machine. He'd just gotten one, and he was so proud of that X-ray machine.
Mhm.
And it was about 2 feet by 3 feet, the screen, and he had me stand beside it and reach my arm behind it, and then he said, "Peek around here, and you can see where your broken bone is." And the bones were separated there. Oh dear. Anyway, he put it back together and put a cast on it, I guess, to hold it together, and it melded. And oh dear.
Well, you're all in one piece now. That's all that matters.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, I have a quick question about this story. You've told me this story a few times throughout the years, usually as an Oscar story where instead of it being you, it's your dad or it's Oscar.
That's true.
The most, and one of there's one detail that changes sometimes. The hole, sometimes it's a badger hole and sometimes it's a gopher hole.
Oh, it was a badger hole. It was a badger.
Those are a little bit bigger, I'm
Yeah,
guessing?
they're decidedly bigger. Gopher holes would be this big around.
Yeah.
A gopher just works its way up there. A badger hole is this big around.
That makes much more sense.
Yes, it sure does. And I fell between the horse's legs somehow, and had my arm like this. I don't know how I did it.
Yeah.
Magic, I guess. Anyway, I did.
Yep.
The other part of the story about growing up and breaking things was I broke both my shoulder collarbones. I don't remember actually how the first one was broken. I know the second one, I was fooling around on the ice. It was in the wintertime. I was fooling around on the ice, and I slipped and fell and somehow broke my collarbone. I don't know how it was. Anyway, that was another trip into the doctor's office. But in that case, he didn't put a cast on, obviously. What he had me carry on was a bag of stones. They were great big stones in a bag, and I had to carry them around and to school and to class and everything else. And so it was a notable time. Oh dear. Anyway, those are the broken bones experiences. Anyway, the other significant thing that happened to me was at age 9. It was in 1940. The summer of 1940, we went to a 4-H camp. It was the first camp that our club had gone to. My dad was the club leader. That means he was the adult in charge of the club. Although he, I don't ever remember him inserting himself into the club affairs. Um, he was a remarkable person. He was a remarkable person.
Mm.
And a lot of my skills I learned from him, just not because he told me about them, but because of watching him and watching what he did. Anyway, he had no authoritarian control over the club, but he was the club leader. It was just that was, he came to every meeting. Anyway, what I remember about that first 4-H club camp was him square dancing, and I was very impressed when my dad would get up and square dance, and also participate in the singing, because they had songs like "Stodely, stodely, stodely, pump, stodely, 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 pump, stodely, 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 pump, pump, pump." Don't remember the verse, but there was a verse to it too. Anyway, we did lots of singing. The other thing that we made was, and I've mentioned this before, we made bowls that we sanded carefully and then finished. And my dad and I did that together. And I was very, very impressed with the result. It was a nice accomplishment, and I still have it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I still have both bowls, both my dad's and mine. The 4-H years were pretty memorable because the club met once a month, and we had a program. Usually somebody was supposed to give a demonstration of something that they'd accomplished or something that they were trying to do. I don't remember what demonstrations I did, but I know I had to give them. I was elected president in the 4th year. I was 14 years old when I was elected president. And then I was elected president again when I was 17, I think. And as a result, got commissions for leadership in the club. The club also was elected the top club in Ransom County. I don't know how many clubs there were in the county. There must have been 20 or so different clubs. Anyway, it was elected the top club in the county, and the flag that we got for that is at the museum in McLeod. So when you get to McLeod, you can go to the museum and see this flag that the club got the year I was president. I think that was the second term when I was about 17. The other thing we had to do was keep careful records of what we were doing. So I have little notebooks of the crops that we planted, the garden vegetables that we grew, the feed that was given to the cows, and all the other stuff about them. And had to write an essay too, describing what was done. And I still have those copies, and they're in my files here. As a result of that effort, it was elected or sent as a member of the state organization. The states selected, I don't know, 10 or 15 kids from across the state to go to the National 4-H Club Congress in Chicago. And my first selection to that was in, I think, 1946,
46 and 47.
46 or 47. Um, and then 2 years later, I was selected to go again because I'd won a state scholarship, for my dairy work, and there were 6 state scholarships from across the country that were selected, and all 6 of us who won that had the chance to go to the person who gave the money for the scholarship, and that person was J.L. Kraft. You've probably heard of Kraft Foods.
Mhm.
Well, the original owner, the original person who started Kraft Foods was J.L. Kraft. He was long retired by that time, 1940s, 49, I guess. He was retired by then, but he and his wife took the 6 of us to breakfast, and then to his office in Evanston, Illinois, Evanston, and we sat in his office. And while there, he gave each of us this book
Mhm.
called Adventures in Jade, and he's autographed it. So the book is autographed by J.L. Kraft himself. He's got a picture on the back of the book of the jade collection that he had.
Mhm.
And your mom has asked for a copy of this. Wow, boy.
Or at least a chance to read it.
Yeah. Here's apparently the
Flower and
flower I got as a result of going to that session. Anyway, that was fun. That was good. Then, because of all the work I'd done, well, what did I do with 4-H? For one thing, I selected the prize vegetables and showed them in the vegetable judging contest. And they did the same thing with the corn. Selected 10 ears of corn that were evenly matched, as evenly matched as they could be, and showed them. I showed cattle. I led my various cows. I had 4-H Sally and 4-H Clara. I led them in the arena and had them stand perfectly still while the judge came by and judged them for their confirmation and that sort of thing. Anyway, it was because of that, because of all those efforts, I was eventually selected as one of 4 kids from the state of North Dakota, 2 boys and 2 girls, to go to National 4-H Club Camp. And that was in 1949, I think, wasn't it? And that's the one that I have a picture of with 200 kids from across the country standing in the yard in front of the White House with President Truman right there in front of us.
Mhm.
And there was me standing right behind President Truman. That was a great feeling. But we went to all sorts of things at the Capitol, in and around the Capitol. Among other things, we went to Senator William Langer's office. He was from Castleton, North Dakota, and he was elected governor in the 1920s, I think. Then eventually became a senator and was a very powerful senator. in Washington. Anyways, Langer took us down to the Senate office building, Senate cafeteria for lunch one day. This is the four kids from North Dakota, and we had lunch with the president, with the senator, and he introduced me to pecan pie. I'd never heard of pecan pie.
And you've loved it ever since.
And it was wonderful, made by the Senate chefs. It was wonderful, and I have loved it ever since. That's true. Except when we went down to the South. Later on, I was in the Army, and I was located in Dothan, Alabama, and Ann and I would try pecan pie in most of the restaurants that we went to. And I remember going into one where you got a wedge of pie, the normal wedge kind of pie, and there was a single half pecan sitting at the top of the wedge. And that was called pecan pie in the South. Oh
no, in Alabama. You haven't been to Texas for theirs.
Anyway, it was something else. So I went other trips too. I went a trip down to the grain exchange in Minneapolis when I was a freshman in college. And partly as a result of that, I decided to switch my major from music, which I initially intended to be a band director. And I switched my major from music to dairy, which lasted only one semester, and then I just gave that up and switched it to ag education. So I was going to be a ag teacher in the high school someplace. Seemed like a better use of my skills than the dairy field. Anyway. What else can I tell about that?
Besides cows, what other animals did you raise?
Well, when I was a wee little kid, we had sheep, and one of my favorite sheep was Tinkerbell, and Tinkerbell did not tolerate little boys very well, and I can remember her knocking me down, and I'd say, "No, Tinkerbell, don't do that to me." And I'd get up and I'd hug her, and she'd bat and baw at me. But anyway, we were good friends. But she didn't tolerate little boys very well. We also had pigs, and I remember my dad and other people coming to help butchering pigs. That was a sight in itself. We had about 20 horses to operate the farm. This was before mechanization came in, and after World War II. Then we got our first tractor and began selling off the horses. So there were fewer of them left. We kept the riding horses, I guess, as long as they lived.
You had prize chickens.
Oh yes, I had prize chickens too. Yes. We'd get 200, I think, little pullets. We'd get them from the store in Mill there, remember? and we'd come and we'd raise them, and they became my responsibility. So that they were pretty good. They were a pretty good investment if you fed them properly. And when, let's see, I was in college when I selected 10 products of that crop that year, and showed them and won some kind of national award. I have the plaque for it right up here.
Chicken of Tomorrow Committee.
Yeah, Chicken of Tomorrow.
Certificate of Quality.
And
Eugene Erickson.
And they sold the meat from those 10 chickens, and I got an incredible amount of money. I think it was $200 for those 10 chickens.
Can you imagine a chicken costing $20?
In a time when they were probably in the grocery store for $1.75.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was just sort of an award for the people who won this thing. I don't remember how many other people were involved in winning that award, but I was one of them. That's true. That was the chicken operation.
That was impressive.
When I quit raising chickens in my sophomore year, my dad went out of the business. He decided not to do them anymore. So he depended on me to take care of them, which I did.
Mm-hmm.
Did you keep some layers around, or did you get rid of all of them?
No, we got rid of the whole flock every year. You know, we keep laying hens over the winter to give us eggs, but then in the spring they were gone too, and we got a new crop.
What's the reasoning behind doing a new crop of chickens every year?
Well, because they sold best for the meat when they were a little over a year old.
Okay.
Or even less than a year old. They would be about 7-8 months old.
Mm-hmm.
When they'd bring the highest price, and that's what we do. We feed them up.
So if they were $1.75 in the grocery store, how much did the stores buy them from, or the?
I don't remember. I don't remember what.
And you don't remember what you paid for them in Milner?
No, I don't. I doubt if I could even look that up in my record books.
Yeah.
I doubt it. You're asking me to dredge back into
long lost memories.
70 to 80 years of memory.
This goes into the category of you've forgotten more than we've ever known.
Anyway, let's see. What else can I tell you about growing up on the farm?
That's a good question. What else can you tell us about growing up on the farm?
When did the farm get electricity and indoor plumbing and all of that?
Oh, that was interesting. We didn't get it till after the war, because REA, Rural Electrification Administration, was begun by Roosevelt in 1939, I think, maybe 1940. and he intended to electrify the rural parts of America. But then the war came, and all that was put on hold. Um, the manufacturers were not making tractors, for example. They were making tanks and jeeps and trucks, that sort of thing. So no tractors were made for about a 4-year period. And then in about 1945, after the war, they switched the manufacturing to tractors and other farm equipment. And what else? Well, electrification. And we got electrification about the same time. I should say first, though, that our farm was probably the most progressive farm in the entire region for having electrification, even in the 1930s, because when I grew up, we had electric lights throughout the house, and it was formed by running a battery, an engine that generated electricity and stored it in batteries. And so we had a whole bank of batteries in the basement, and that furnished the electricity for the farm. The lines went all the way out to the barn, and so the barn had electric lights too. And that was a very unusual thing in the whole region. And we had those as long as I remember. So that has to be from 1935 or so on. We were very, very proud of those. Anyway, the only thing that worked was lights, because we didn't have any other machinery that operated under electric power. I don't know if we could have or not, but we didn't. But we did have the lights, and that was a major thing. We also had an interesting device. We had a kerosene lit refrigerator, and so we'd have to come and fill the fuel tank in the refrigerator with kerosene. That was one of my early jobs as a little kid. Had to put the kerosene in the refrigerator so that I forgot what kind of a motor it had in there, but it had some kind of motor that ran on kerosene, and that then created Freon, I think it was. Mm-hmm. The stuff, the coolant that went through the refrigerator, and so we had ice and cold milk, and that was another thing that was very unusual. Most people did not have that. Anyway, as I said, ours was a progressive farm at the time.
During the war, things like meat and eggs and butter and milk were all rationed. But on the farm, how did that work? Because you would have had all of those things planned.
We had all the meat we needed because we butchered animals, pigs and beef. So we had all the meat that we needed. we had to use points to get sugar and flour, I think, and certain products that were processed that came into the local store.
Mhm.
And the only way you could get those if you had ration points, because they were tightly controlled.
But things
Through the
that
war.
other people couldn't get, you could eat, you had.
Not necessarily. Um, I don't know if meat was rationed or not.
The eggs were.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't remember. I don't remember. I wouldn't be surprised. But if people had the money, they could buy most of those things. I don't remember anybody being desperately poor during World War II.
Okay. What was the thing, the weather phenomenon, the wrath of God kind of event that scared farmers the most?
Oh, tornadoes. Tornadoes would come through every summer. And they were a long funnel cloud that would come down from the clouds and then circulate around, and they were disasters. I remember one poor farmer, Casper Peterson, lost his barn twice.
No.
That's not supposed to happen. The tornado is supposed to come once and then forget you, but it didn't in his case. He lost his barn. He rebuilt it, built a brand new one, and the tornado came and ripped it away.
I have a friend who was hit by lightning twice.
Really?
Jimmy McGregor.
I remember as a kid watching tornadoes go by. None of them came close to our farmstead, but they were close enough so that I could see them, and it's pretty impressive sight. The thing that frightened us the most was prairie fires, because the train tracks went 3/4 of a mile from our farmstead, and they were all steam locomotives, and in addition to whenever the firemen put in fuel in the boiler, sparks would come up from the smokestack, and and very often would start fires, especially when the grass was dry and tinder-like, and they could catch fires easily that way. And I remember watching the fires go by. In fact, one fire burned down farmstead, probably 3/4 of a mile from where ours was. It just swept across the area and burned up house, barn, the whole works. That's what the family called the Cunes. And they left the farm after that because they had to go back and start it again. Yeah, it was pretty devastating.
Well, the interesting thing was there was one there this last spring.
This last summer, yeah, there was one that started in Milner and swept probably 15 miles or at least 10 miles from Milner all the way up to McLeod. And it came within a hair's breadth of the farmstead where I grew up. They would have been, did backfires, plowed furrows around the farm to stop the fire from jumping into the getting into the farmstead. So it was pretty dramatic. And that was that recently. I don't know how that one began though, because obviously it wasn't a railway that started. It was something else. I don't know. I haven't heard.
How about blizzards?
Blizzards were wonderful.
You liked blizzards?
Oh yes, because you just closed down everything.
Obviously, one never hit while you were at school and you had to make it home.
Well, I went by a school bus. Emil Oldwood drove the school bus, and during the wintertime he used a horse and sleigh because it was the best way to get around. And in the sleigh he had a kerosene stove and to keep us warm. And so we had this kerosene stove in the sleigh, and we went to school, toasty warm. The worst winter I remember was probably 1942, I think it was. We had a bank of willows on the east side of our property. They stood up at least 30 feet high. They were tall trees, but they were thick and willows with lots of branches. And so even in the wintertime, after they lost their leaves, there were just lots of branches around, and it was like a windbreak in a way. And that stopped the wind, stopped the wind, and that dropped the snow. And so that whole bank of trees were covered over. So there was one huge snowbank, at least 20, 30 feet high, along the whole eastern side of our farmstead. And it was so solid that I remember my dad could drive a team of horses up over in a sleigh, up over the top of the snowbank and down the other side.
Wow.
That was incredible.
Did you ski down it?
I must have. I don't know.
When did you start skiing?
I don't know. I don't remember. Well, there wasn't much to ski because there were no hills.
But most of the willow trees. Mostly cross country.
No, could have done the cross country. I didn't do it that much though. Anyway, I do remember going in the sleigh to school every day, over and back. That was he must have had about a six mile run to pick up kids, because he picked up lots of kids along the way, and whipped them to my place where I was one of the last ones, I think, who rode to town on the sleigh.
How many kids were in your school?
There were 8 grades and 2 in high school, so that's 10 grades. They had a principal, 2 teachers, principal plus 2 teachers, and in my grade there were 20 kids. First grade, my first grade, there were 20 kids.
Were there still 20 by the time you reached sixth grade?
No, by the time I reached eighth grade, there were only about 10.
What happened to the other half?
Moved away. The town lost its population, began to lose its population in the 1930s after the Depression, because it had hit every community in the country hard. Yeah, I remember a lot of the families were in town. Many of them moved away, and we had parties to send them off, that sort of thing. The other thing I guess I should mention is that the church was very important. All the time I was growing up, I think the only church in the community was the Presbyterian Church, and it organized Sunday schools, it organized Christmas pageants, so we put on great shows for Christmas, both at the church and at the school. And I had various roles in that. I remember being a sheep or something like that one time, a shepherd another time. I was never Joseph or anything like that, but I had other roles. And that was very important. That went across all denominations. It wasn't until when was it? We started getting a Lutheran. Oh yeah, we started getting a Lutheran minister, and he would come from Oak Grove College, Oak Grove High School in Fargo. He'd come down and preach at McLeod, and the Presbyterian minister would come every week too. But when the Lutherans started, they sort of drained off the rest of the community because most of the people were Lutheran.
I thought there were two churches back to back.
No, there was only one until the Lutherans decided to split off and move in their own church. And then they moved in that second church that was back to back with the Presbyterian. But that wasn't until the 1950s. Yeah, because they had their services in the Presbyterian
So
church.
that was after you left.
Yeah, it was after I left. They had their services in the Presbyterian church all the time.
Because I know I got one of the historic teacups or coffee cups that was used, and it was one of the last ones that they had that was actually used for the coffee service. And whoever sold it to me said, your grandma or grandpa might have drunk from that cup.
Oh, really? Well, we've covered quite a range.
Yeah.
The farm, the prairie fires.
Did you ever have locusts?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we did. Back in the 30s, so I would have been probably 8 or 9 years old when we had a horde of locusts come through. We called them grasshoppers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We had a whole infestation of grasshoppers that came through, and they were horrible because they ate everything.
Mm-hmm.
They ate the leaves off the corn, for example. It was just devastating. Um, and my dad was president of the town board at the time, and he had to organize um, uh, attempts to poison them. And all I remember of this was that they built a container with a great big 50-gallon barrel at the top, and then below the barrel was a fan that went around and around. I don't remember what controlled it, but when you could pull this thing, and then they had sawdust in the barrel, and the sawdust was poisoned, and they drive along and go through the edges of every field, spreading this poison sawdust. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it did any good or not, but it killed the locusts who came by and ate it. But I don't know if it stopped them very much at all. But I remember them doing that, and that was pretty impressive. The other thing that I remember was hunting jackrabbits, because the other infestation we had was a horde of jackrabbits. Now these are not ordinary bunny rabbits.
No,
They're
those are
huge,
big.
huge rabbits. They're big animals, and they would cause all sorts of damage to farm property. And so one of Roosevelt's programs was the WPA, Work Progress Administration, and he hired anybody who was available to work for the WPA. My dad never did, because he was independent enough so he didn't have to. But there were dozens and dozens of people in McLeod who took jobs with the WPA, and one of their tasks in the wintertime was to go out and hunt jackrabbits. And they go out, I vaguely remember this, they'd go out lined up, a row of hunters with shotguns, and walk along, and when they came to a jackrabbit, they'd kill them. And they came back with piles and piles of jackrabbits because they got so many of them.
Mm-hmm.
Did they eat the meat?
I don't have no idea. We didn't have one. I know, but jackrabbits are good to eat, I guess. But it was sure a major event.
What was your favorite meal that your mom
Not
made?
tapioca pudding.
We know not tapioca pudding. Peter, you know the story of the tapioca pudding?
I don't think so.
Oh, Grandma went away for a month, and Grandpa made some tapioca pudding. Unfortunately, Grandpa didn't realize that when you make tapioca pudding, a little bit of tapioca becomes a great big bowl of tapioca.
Oh.
So he used a lot of tapioca, and he made a huge bowl. And he looked at your grandfather and he said, "We have to finish this before your mother comes home."
And it lasted a month.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
I have never seen him so defeated except for when he learned that fruit soup that Grandma fed him every Christmas that he loved had tapioca in it. He had sworn he would never eat it again. And here it's in one of his favorite dishes that Grandma made.
well, I can easily tell you what my favorite food was.
Uh-huh.
Pheasants. We hunted pheasants in the fall, and my mother fried them, and she made pheasant gravy, and it was incredible. I've never had anything like it. I've never had any food that was as good as that.
Mm.
That's still mouth-watering to me.
You did when we grew up, and we had plenty of pheasant.
Somehow we never managed to make it the way my mother did,
Yeah.
especially the gravy. Oh, the gravy was just,
Did Mom try?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
I thought she cooked a rabbit one time in one of your for dinner party.
Oh, she cooked a rabbit one time with Bill Stearns from Ladysmith, Wisconsin. We were down in Dothan, Alabama, and she invited Bill over for chicken dinner. Well, she went to the store and she couldn't find any chicken. They had rabbit for sale. So she bought the rabbit and brought it home and fixed it and fried it. And
Just the way she would chicken.
and it looked like chicken, kind of looked like chicken. And Bill said, "Gosh, this is really good chicken." At the end of the meal, she finally told me, "Bill, this was really rabbit," and he'd never had it before. Oh,
That's funny.
well, you've unearthed all sorts of stories here.
Tell me
Yeah.
about a cup of coffee
My first cup of coffee.
that you made.
Well, that was a memorable experience too. I think I was probably 11 years old. My folks went away for the day, and I was home alone. And at noon, I decided, oh, I'll make my own lunch. And my mother had left soup or something for me. And I thought, I'd like a cup of coffee too, because I was already drinking coffee by that time. And we had a coffee grinder that was fixed to the wall, and we filled it with coffee beans, and then you ground up the beans for as much coffee as you want to make. Well, I ground up a container of beans. I measured out a cup of them, and I thought, all right, that should do it. And I poured the cup into the coffee pot, put in a cup of water, and then boiled it.
And had sludge.
All right.
I'm not sure what my comment to my mother was when she got home. I told her she'd have to teach me how to make coffee, because that was the worst coffee I'd ever had.
I bet.
Oh, I can't imagine even drinking it. No,
But you made yourself drink it.
I guess I made it. I had to.
Mhm. Yeah. That's funny.
And we did. And we didn't throw away anything out. Anyway,
You were frugal.
Yeah.
you have enough of the story tonight.
Okay. All in the recording there.